At number 9, the Messerschmitt Me-262 Schwab Swallow. Yes, there were jet engine planes developed during World War II. Nazi Germany began developing plans for jet engines in the late 1930s. The Messerschmitt Me-262 was designed in 1938, and it had its first test flight in April of 1941. While they were able to test their jet engine plane, it wasn't great because the technology was in an early stage. Germany achieved a takeoff with a jet engine in 1942, but this technology didn't exactly take off in the country. But why is that? The Allied forces knew Germany was trying to develop their superior technology in the air, so the Allies made sure to bomb German airfields to slow down and deter progress. Also, Allied planes would attack bases where the Me-262 were taking off or landing because that was when they were at their most vulnerable. Allied pilots that faced the Me-262 were shocked at the speed and agility of these planes, and around 300 of these planes saw combat during the war. According to the National Air and Space Museum, the Me-262 Schwab utilized two Junkers Jumbo 004B turbine engines and featured streamlined swept wings along with a formidable arsenal of four 30mm cannons. Boasting a top speed of around 549 miles per hour, the 262 outpaced the renowned North American Mustang by 120 miles per hour at equivalent altitudes. And while it may not have matched the Mustang's agility, the Me-262 could enter or exit combat at its discretion. Another issue with the Messerschmitt Me-262 was that Adolf Hitler saw these planes as bombers, while other German officials saw them as fighter planes. Germany produced over 1,400 of these aircraft, and the pilots that flew them said they were absolutely fantastic to fly. By the end of the war, there were issues with the materials needed to build the planes. Also, Germany was basically using slave labor, and fuel shortages were a major issue as well. Number 8. The Boeing B29 Super Fortress. The elite bomber of World War II was the Boeing B29 Super Fortress. It was 1940 when the United States military asked manufacturers to design a bomber that could reach 400 miles per hour, fly a range of over 5,000 miles, and carry some 2,000 pounds worth of bombs for 2,500 miles. And in the end, it was Boeing that delivered the B29 Super Fortress. The B29 Super Fortress had a wingspan of 141 feet and was 99 feet long. There were two bomb bays to keep the B-29 balanced, and the aircraft was able to hold a crew of 10 to 14 people. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the B-29 was equipped with 10 50-caliber machine guns and a single 20mm cannon. And remote control allowed 4 of the gun turrets to be operated from any of the 5 sighting stations on board. The B-29 was first used in 1944 for a bombing mission over Bangkok, Thailand. It would then be used for bombing missions over Japan. The B-29s were armed with firebomb clusters for their Japanese missions. And during those operations, the B-29s hit some 63 cities and destroyed a large number of buildings and homes. The B-29s did so much damage that a reported 8 million Japanese people were homeless due to the bombing missions. The most infamous bombing mission by the B-29 was the atomic bomb drops on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945. Number 7. The P51 Mustang. Perhaps the most dominant plane the US military used during World War II was the P51 Mustang. When this plane was paired with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the single-seat, single-engine P51 became a feared weapon in the skies. The P51 was designed around 1940 by James H. Kindleberger. The purpose of this plane was to design a fighter aircraft for the British Royal Air Force. At the time, Britain was fighting Germany, and the United States wasn't yet involved in the war. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, they were usually outfitted with 2 50-caliber machine guns mounted on the nose and 4 30-caliber machine guns mounted on the wings. But while the engines on the P-51 Mustangs were satisfactory, they weren't considered exceptional. With the switch to the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the P-51 became an excellent high-altitude performer, especially at 20,000 feet. Some specifications from the Encyclopedia Britannica indicate that it achieved a top speed of approximately 440 miles an hour and attained an operational ceiling nearing 42,000 feet. When the US entered the war in late 1941, they too would use the P-51 Mustang with the British engine. The P-51 became the ace of the fighter planes, and they were more impressive in battle than German aircraft. The P-51 would join bombing raids and they would protect bombers over Germany. allowing bombing missions in the country to increase. And in the United States, some 13,000 P51 Mustangs were built for the war. At number 6, the Lockheed P38 Lightning. The most successful twin-engine fighter plane of World War II was the Lockheed P38 Lightning tactical bomber. This plane was used in the European and Pacific theaters from 1942 until 1945. It was an important plane that assisted with escorting bombers. The P-38 was also a great plane to use for photo reconnaissance. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning was conceived by Clarence Kelly Johnson in 1936, and work began in 1937. The plane had an interesting design featuring a twin boom configuration. The pilot was located in a central pod with armaments. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the engines were housed in mid-wing nacelles that extended into tail booms. These tail booms supported twin rudders and were connected by a horizontal tail. However, the test flight of the prototype in 1939 failed to deter the Army from ordering planes. There were some kinks to iron out, especially the loss of control in a dive caused by aerodynamic compressibility, based on reports from the National Air and Space Museum. Also, they noticed that the airplane also performed rather well at high speeds, and that the definitive P-38L model could reach speeds even better than 420 miles per hour between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. Another issue for the P-38 was the cost to manufacture the plane. They were more costly, and the US only ordered a small number of them. When the US entered the war in 1941, they deployed the P-38 into combat. The P-38 was used in North Africa against the Germans but suffered heavy losses. The reason was that the P-38 was involved in low-altitude fighting and not high-altitude fighting. Another issue was the lack of soldiers interested in being trained on the P-38. It was viewed as an intimidating aircraft to handle. There was also a rumor going around the military that the P-38 was basically a flying coffin. The rumor said that the planes malfunctioned easily, and when the pilots ejected, they would be decapitated. The P-38 saw action in the Pacific Theater in April 1942. Some did reconnaissance work, while others did combat missions over New Guinea. One of the most memorable missions they had in the Pacific was in 1943, when the US learned that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the commander of the Japanese Navy, would be visiting troops on the battlefront. Yamamoto was the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. The US learned that Yamamoto would be flying to the mission on a bomber, so some 14 P-38s were sent on a mission to ambush the planes, and luckily for them, they succeeded. These planes did better than the Pacific than in Europe. But why is that? Well, the P-38 had heating issues in high-altitude missions in Europe, but missions in the Pacific weren't flown at a height of over 20,000 feet, allowing the P-38 to succeed. At number 5, the Gloucester F4 Meteor. The only aircraft developed by the Allies during World War II with jet capabilities was the British fighter jet, the Gloucester F4 Meteor. The project started in 1936, and aircraft development began in 1940. Prototypes were developed, and there were various test flights, but the Gloucester F4 Meteor didn't see action until 1944. The initial specifications for the aircraft included a length of 41 feet and 3 inches and a wingspan of exactly 43 feet. It had an empty weight of 8,140 pounds and a maximum takeoff weight of 13,795 pounds. The Planes of Fame Museum describes the Meteor as one of Britain's first-generation jet interceptors designed during World War II. Its notable achievements include intercepting V-1 flying bombs over England. Subsequent versions of the Meteor were also displayed during the Korean conflict, where Australian pilots flew them. Post-World War II, the Meteor underwent improvements, and in 1946, it set an airspeed record reaching an astonishing 616 miles per hour. What's your favorite World War II era plane? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 4, the B-17 Flying Fortress. Perhaps the most famous plane of World War II was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. This 4-engine bomber became the norm for the US military during the war. The B-17 was designed to attack regardless of whether it was day or night and perform at high altitudes that were way out of the way of anti-aircraft fire. This plane was pretty advanced for a bomber. As per the Encyclopedia Britannica, the B-17's bomb sight comprised a gyroscopically stabilized telescopic sight connected to an electromechanical computer. The Bombardier provided inputs for altitude, atmospheric conditions, airspeed, ground speed, and drift. Additionally, the B-17 featured 3 turrets situated on the upper fuselage, belly, and tail of the aircraft. The final production model was the B-17G. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica once again, the B-17 was equipped with a formidable array of 13 50 caliber machine guns, with 2 strategically placed in a newly introduced chin turret designed to defend against head-on attacks. The B-17G was notably characterized by its abundant machine gun coverage. They could operate at 25,000 to 30,000 feet depending on their bomb load, and typically their bomb loads were around 4,000 pounds. This didn't take them out of enemy fire though. Bombing missions that went deep into Germany were beyond dangerous. B-17s were shot down at alarming rates, and the missions were scrapped until 1944, when the planes could be escorted by other aircraft like P-51s. Those who flew the B-17 regarded the plane as an excellent weapon against the enemy. These planes were used in the 1950s and 60s by the United States and other countries. It is believed to have been used by the Brazilian military until 1968 as well. Number 3. Vought F4U Corsair. Speedy and deadly, the Vought F4U Corsair was perhaps one of the best fighter planes used by the Allies during World War II. The Vought F4U Corsair was developed in the late 1930s, and by 1940, a prototype was completed. Right out of the gate, this plane was something special. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans stated on its website that on the plane's maiden flight, it broke the speed record for a single-seat fighter aircraft by reaching over 400 miles per hour in level flight. After that, the Navy was sold on this speedy fighter, and as a result, they ordered Vought to begin production. In the end, nearly 13,000 F4Us would be produced by the end of the initial production run in 1952. The plane had 3 50 caliber machine guns on each wing. However, this plane was notorious for having poor cockpit visibility, which made it extremely difficult to land on aircraft carriers. This was a plane for experienced pilots only, and it earned the nickname the Ensign Eliminator by Navy pilots. In 1942, the Corsair was used by the Marines, so the planes were landed on airstrips rather than naval aircraft carriers. By 1943, they were using the Corsair in the Pacific Theater to fight the Japanese. According to the National Air and Space Museum, the F4U had an instant influence on the Pacific Air conflict. Pilots could capitalize on the Corsair's speed and firepower, engaging Japanese aircraft with superior maneuverability only when conditions favored the Americans. Devoid of armor or self-sealing fuel tanks, no Japanese fighter or bomber could endure the concentrated barrage from the 6 50 caliber machine guns mounted on a Corsair for more than a few seconds. One pilot who flew the Corsair was Charles Lindbergh, the man who made the first solo non-stop transatlantic flight. Lindbergh was assigned to bombing missions, and he dropped the first 2,000-pound bomb on an atoll. These planes would see plenty of action following the war. They were used in the Korean War and were among the favorites of pilots of the airshow circuit. Number 2. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero. One of the best Japanese planes for World War II was the Mitsubishi A6M Zero. This was their most produced aircraft and was the typical aircraft for pilots to fly during the war. This plane was developed during the 1930s and was essentially the main fighter plane the Allies faced during the Pacific Theater. This was a great plane for aircraft carriers, as it was fast and easy to maneuver. The Zero was used by the Japanese in their invasion of China, and it was an aircraft used during Pearl Harbor. When the United States faced the Japanese in the Pacific, they soon learned not to take on these planes in a dogfight. These aircraft were armed with 2 20mm cannons and 2 7.7mm machine guns. The Zero could hit 316 miles per hour and was used by the kamikaze pilots on their suicide missions. And at number 1, the Yakev Yak 3. One of the top planes used by the Soviet Union during World War II was the Yakev Yak 3. This was a plane that was developed around 1940, but the Soviets were facing shortages of materials to build the plane at the time. But by 1943, they were able to get the Yak 3 produced and ready for combat. As reported by HotCars.com, the Yak 3, conceived under the leadership of Soviet aeronautical engineer Alexander Sergeyevich Yakovlev, stands out as a single-seat monoplane fighter aircraft with an impressive kill-to-loss ratio against adversaries, including Luftwaffe fighters. Renowned for its ease of handling, the Yak 3 contributed significantly to the progress of Soviet pilots against the Germans. Additionally, French fighters were provided with this aircraft for deployment against German forces. This beast could hit a top speed of 400 miles per hour but generally reached a cruising speed of 285 miles per hour. Do you think you could handle flying one of these World War II era planes? Let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.